Hello my friends and welcome to the channel. So I did a video on state management in React using Context API, and I said okay, let me just do another video on state management in React using Redux and Redux Toolkit. So I'm going to teach you most things you're going to need to know about working with Redux and Redux Toolkit in a very simple and easy to understand manner. All right, so before we get started, if you'd like to check out my React Beginner to Advanced course, I'm going to leave a discount link in the description. This course teaches you both the advanced and the beginner level topics of React. So it's something you should definitely check out. Then also, if you like a free React roadmap, which is just a list of the important concepts and topics you need to understand for you to have enough confidence to start applying for React developer jobs, then I'm going to leave a free link in the description where you can get this roadmap for absolutely free. All right, thank you so much, and let's get started. All right, guys, so now let's talk about Redux in this project. The very first question I'd like to answer is, what is Redux? So let's do this by going to the official website redux.js.org, and they say that Redux is a predictable state container for JavaScript apps. And by JavaScript, they don't mean React, they mean React, JavaScript, and other JavaScript framework. Okay, so JavaScript frameworks like Vue, Svelte, and all of that, they can actually tap into Redux to manage their state. All right, so now let's go back to our slide. And to make things simple, I say that Redux is a state management tool for React. And prior to this lecture, we've actually had a taste of state management in React using Context API. Previously, we had to pass our state via props, and we saw the concept of prop drilling. And then I did mention that prop drilling is not something that you want to keep in a very large application. So if you have maybe 2-3 components that you need to pass props to, prop drilling is actually fine. But as your application gets bigger, we said that you can use an API, the Context API, that actually comes with React, and it will help you manage your state better. All right, now before Context API actually came into the scene, we had Redux. So Redux was like what people used to manage their app-wide states. And functionally, Redux is actually similar to Context API. Basically, what it does is that it creates like a separate file or a container where your states live, and any component that needs that state can reach out to that location or that container and get access to the state. All right, so that's essentially the functionality of both Context API and Redux. So now the question is, how is Redux different, or how is Context API different from Redux? That's what we're going to see in the next slide. So I just want to do a quick comparison between Redux and Context API. So Context API is a built-in tool that comes with React. All right, what that means is that it's a inbuilt tool, whereas Redux is an additional installation, which means that at the end of the day, it makes your React application bigger. Even if it's just a little bit bigger, it's still bigger. All right, and that's an extra load you can say that it puts on your application. That aside, I don't think that is really significant though. But another difference is that Context API actually requires minimal setup. We've seen how we can set up Context API in one of the previous lectures. However, Redux requires extensive setup to integrate with our React application, like really extensive setup. Okay, great. So Context API is specifically designed for static data that is not often refreshed or updated. In other words, data that doesn't change often. Whereas Redux works really great with both static and dynamic data. We're going to see that in the future. Now, with Context API, adding new context actually requires you to create that context from scratch. Whereas in Redux, it's easy to extend. It's easy to extend your setup. In other words, it's easily extendable due to the ease of adding new data after your initial setup. And the last difference on my list is that Debugging can actually be hard in context API, even when you have dev tools, whereas it's incredibly easy to debug stuff with Redux because it has its own debugging tool, kind of. It's a Redux dev tool, and it makes it really easy for you to see exactly what is going on in your Redux app and know where the bug is coming from and stuff like that. So these are some of the differences between Redux and context API. There's one question though: in what kind of project should you use context API? In what kind of project should you use Redux? So if you have it like a small project, right, where you need a little bit more advanced state management, just go with context API. Everything will be fine. But for complex projects, like as your project gets bigger, you may need to switch to Redux. All right. Now, let me just go to the next slide where I now talk about why you should learn Redux. So let us be realistic. Many of us developers, right, in the start of our career, we're going to work for companies, right? So, but it's important for you to know that many companies use Redux for their state management. So it's part of the knowledge requirement if you're going to apply as a junior React developer or a junior front-end developer. You need to have some knowledge about React and state management with Redux, right? Now, even if it's not discretely, it's not expressly part of the requirement, if you can confidently say that, oh, I have knowledge of Redux, state management, it kind of gives you an edge over any other developer that doesn't have, especially if that company you're applying to uses Redux as for their state management. Then if you have your own project going, maybe your plan is to run a SaaS. SaaS means software as a service, so like your own mini startup, right? Over time, your application or your software could get a little bit more complex and you may need to switch to Redux. So it's a plus if you already know how Redux works, when that time comes. So I just gave you 2 reasons why you should actually calm down and learn how Redux works. Don't worry, I've taken our time to break the lectures really into small bits such that this is probably the easiest Redux teaching or tutorial you're probably going to find anywhere. All right. So thank you so much for watching this one. I'll see you in the next one. All right, now let's talk a little bit about how Redux work. So this on the left here is our app, represents our app with all of the components inside of it. Now this on the right, I'm talking about Redux setup now, is a store, and this store contains the different states in our application. So in this particular example, I've listed out 2 states. The first is the auth state that monitors whether a user is authenticated or not. In other words, it monitors whether a user is logged in or logged out. The second is the theme state. So let's say we have on our website light theme and dark theme. This is the state that monitors that or that handles that. Okay, so essentially this store is where we're going to store all of our data that our app, in other words our component, needs to render a certain type of UI. All right, great. However, how can this component get access to the information in the store? Right, that's a very valid question. So the way the component gets access to the information in the store is via a hook that comes with Redux. Because we have so much information in this store, it has to, and each component does not need all the information, all the state information at the same time, or all the state data at the same time. So it selects the particular component it needs. For example, if a certain component wants to see if a user is logged in or logged out, then it selects this auth state component and uses it to know, okay, is this user logged in or not? And the way it gets that data from the store is via a use selector hook that comes with Redux. All right, so that's it. We have a component, we have a central store that stores all the data, all the states we need for our application. The component can make connection to this store to select a particular data using the use selector hook. All right, now what if, let's say it's picks the auth state and it finds out that okay, this user is logged out or this user is not logged in, and then it needs this user to log in. In other words, for the user to access some features on your website or on your app, the user needs to log in. What that means is that we need to manipulate this state. We need to change this auth state from logged out to login, something like that. However, this component cannot directly manipulate the data inside the store. So how does it do that? Well, before I tell you how it does that, let me tell you the only thing that can manipulate the data inside this store. That is a reducer function. It's only a reducer function that can change the store data. So what this means is that this component, your components inside of your app, will need to find a way to tell this reducer what it wants to happen or the action that it wants to be executed. In this case, we want to log in a particular user that is logged out. So we want to log that user in. We're working with this auth state. So this component needs to tell this reducer function that the only function that can manipulate this store, by the way, that look, I need to change the auth state of this particular user from logged out to login, something like that. So how does it do that? Well, it dispatches an action. All right, so this component dispatches an action. Usually this action is triggered by maybe when a user clicks on a button or something like that. Let's just use click on a button as an example. So if I click on a button, this component can dispatch a function, and the way it dispatches that function, it makes use of a use dispatch hook that comes with Redux, or that Redux makes available. So it dispatches that action, and that action is sent to the reducer function. So in this case where we want to change the auth state from logged out to login, I guess the action that will be dispatched here will be, maybe, let me just say log in. That's the name of the action. So it sends that action, and that action is sent into the reducer. The reducer now says, okay, I've been sent an action to change this auth state from logged out to login. The user effects that change, and then the component now gets access to that particular state that has been changed. All right, so this is the cycle of events that happen when we use Redux to set up our state management, and we're going to see that in the next video. All right, thank you so much, and I'll see you in the next one. All right, now to learn the basics of Redux, we have this simple setup. I just grabbed it from one of the previous projects, our counter app project we created. So basically the only thing I did is that I just added this logout button on top there. So if you come here, this is the components. I added this logout button which doesn't do anything, right? So if you click on subtract, reset, and add, you see that all the functionality works just like we did when we built the project. Now also I added a list of instructions that we're going to use to work with Redux. Like, Redux is kind of complex to set up for beginners, and so I kind of found a way to compress all of the steps you need to work with Redux into just 5. All right, so with these 5 instructions, you have a guide, a short guide to work with Redux. So of course, the first thing you need to do is you need to install Redux, because Redux is an external package that you need to install on top of React. And so we're going to do that with this instruction, npm install Redux, then React Redux. So let me grab that. I'll just copy that, and I'll come here to my terminal here at the bottom, and I think I'm going to create a new okay, so I have here. So basically, if you are on the first terminal here that is watching for your changes, you need to click this plus icon to create a new terminal, such that you can now paste in an instruction or type out an instruction. So in my case, my instruction is npm install Redux, React Redux. The reason why we are doing Redux first is Redux is a tool that is first of all available to several frameworks. React can use it, Vue can use it, and other frameworks can use it. But because we are building a React specific application, I now have to add this other extension here, React Redux. I'll go ahead and hit enter, and all things being equal, the package should install to my application or to this React setup. All right, so package has finished installing. Now to confirm that we have actually installed it, let's come to our package.json just to be sure. So package.json, you see here we have React Redux. Okay, this is the version, and then so that's it basically, and then we have Redux. All right, so like just as we installed. Now we can close this guy and let's come back to our instructions. So everything we do as far as working with this Redux is concerned, we're going to follow this instruction. So let's look at number one. Number one says we need to create a store. Let me actually say create a store, because it's just one we're going to create. So I'll say create a store, and that's where all our data would come from, will be stored, right? So I would create a store. Now how are we going to create a store? Where are we going to create a store? These are some of the questions that you come to mind. Just like we have this component folder that holds all of our components, I'll go inside my source folder and I'll create another folder called store. That's because Redux likes to have its own separate container, which we're calling store in this case, where all of our state management data issues and everything would go into. All right, so I'll inside of this store folder, I'll now create another file or a file. I'll call that store.js, and then I'll hit enter. All right, great. So now you see we've created a store, but actually what we did is we created a store.js file. We've not actually created a store. So now to create a store, you need something from Redux to help you create a store. What is that thing we need? So I'll come here, I'll say import, and I'll say create store that comes from Redux. Right, hit enter. So is this create store that gives us the capacity, that gives us the power to create a store. All right, so here I'll come down and let me say store, or let me say create a store, just to help things organize importantly. Now I'll come here and I'll create a variable. I'll call that variable store, and that variable is going to be equal to our create store. All right, and then I'll just open my parentheses. As it is now, I've created a store. Right, now let's look at the next instruction just to make sure that we're on the same page. Now this next instruction says we need to create a reducer and pass it as an argument to the store we just created. So I'll come here. Now before we create the reducer, let's not forget something. This store needs to be accessed from different places in our components, different components within our app. All right, sorry about that. So we're going to need to export this store. So you know what I'm going to do? Just at the bottom here, I'll say export default. So let's make it a default export, and then I'll say store, like so, and close that. All right, so now instruction 2 can now fire off. So it says we need to create a reducer. A reducer is a function, so we need to create a reducer function and pass it as an argument to the store. So I'll come here and just above the store, because if I'm going to pass it as an argument to the store, then I should probably create it before I pass it. So I'll just come here and I'll say reducer. Let's just say reducer. All right, I'll come here and specifically I want to create a reducer for I actually okay, so specifically I want to create a reducer for this counter app. So I would like to give it a name, and I'll call it count reducer. So let me create an arrow function. Reducer is a function, so I'll call it count reducer, like so, and then I'll open it up. Now if you remember when we talked about reducers, we said that reducers, they're going to take two parameters. The first is a state, let me add a comma, and the second is an action. All right, so if you skipped our reducer lecture or our reducer section, you probably need to maybe go back and do a quick refresher, or if you've forgotten, you probably need to go back, do a quick refresher on the reducer, then come back to this lecture so that everything will just balance out. All right, so we've created this count reducer and we said it takes a state and an action. This state, right, we need to set the state. So I'll come here inside this thing, I'll just give it I'll give it a value of 0, and ES6 gives us the capacity to actually do this. So I'll give the state an initial value of 0. All right, let's continue. Now let's come down here. What are the things we want to do to this state? If you come to our original counter app, you'll see that there are some things we do. The first is that we subtract, we reset, and we add. In an ideal state managed application that is managed with use state hook. But for use reducer, what we are going to do is we are going to be able to catch actions. So here, inside here, I'm just going to write some actions that we expect, to come from, to be sent from this component to this our store. So here I'm going to say that if, and so let's open a parenthesis. Like I've said before in the previous reducer lecture, you can either use a switch statement or if-else statement. Personally, I prefer to use if statement because for any level of programmer, it's easy to read an if-else statement. That's why I just prefer if statement. So I'll say if action dot type is equal to, so that's need to be 3 equals. So what's the first thing we want to do? Subtract, right? So I'll open a parenthesis quote here and then capital letter subtract, which is just a convention. Then I want to do something. So this state that is 0, I want to subtract 1. So here I'll say return state minus 1. So this, if this action never gets called, then it will return state, so 0 minus 1. So if I do like this now, it will become minus 1. So if it's 0 initially, if I hit subtract, it will become minus 1. That is what this action is doing. But then there are 2 other actions I want to perform. I want to reset and I want to add. So let's do like this. Let's duplicate this twice. And let's do reset first. Or maybe add first. So I'll say if the action.type is equal to add, then I want to do state plus 1. Then lastly, if it's equal to reset, then I want to do state and set it back to 0. Simple, very simple set of instructions because it's a simple app. So if you go back to the instruction, now we've created the reducer. So the first thing says create a reducer. Now we've created this reducer. Now it now says, the second part of the instruction says pass it as an argument to the store. So how do you pass this reducer as an argument to the store? Well, just grab the name of the reducer, count reducer, right? And come here to your store. So this is the store, create const store equals create store, and then just pass that as an argument. That's all you need to do to pass it as an argument. All right. So if you come to instruction, you see that we've carried out instruction 1 and instruction 2. So we're going to break the video here, and in the next video we're going to come to instruction 3. See you in the next one. All right, so now we've been able to create a store, and we've also created a reducer. But there's one thing though, we need to complete our reducer. If any of this is not the case, like if there's an action that does not match any of this, then at the end here we just need to return the current state. All right, so that's probably what the last thing we needed to add to our reducer. Great. Now before we go ahead and enter our instruction number 3, let's introduce us to a tool that is called Redux DevTools. So what I got to do is let me open up my browser and I'll come here. So just do a quick search of Redux DevTools. It's a Chrome extension actually that we can install. So if you click on this Chrome extension, it will take you to this page. So just go ahead and install, add to Chrome. I already have it added to Chrome, so I mean there's nothing to do. But if you scroll down, you'll see their website. So now go ahead and click on their website and it will bring you to their GitHub page. So on their GitHub page, or just, of course, it's going to load and be at the top. So all you just need to do is scroll down to where they say basic usage. All right. So scroll down and you see this example here, const store equals create store. So of course, you remember we added our reducer to our store, right? So what you then need to do is to add this line here to the store. So I'm just going to copy that and I'll come to my store. Here I'll add a comma, I'll add a comma here, and then I'll just paste that in. All right. So what this will do is that it will give us a visual representation of everything we do, our states. Just a fantastic tool. So, but for now, let me go ahead and save this, and that's all you need to do to add Redux DevTool to your store. All right. So, in the spirit of keeping things separated, I'm going to stop the lecture here, and in the next one, we're going to continue setting up our Redux. All right, so now let's continue. So we are here in step 3 or instruction number 3, and it says that we need to provide our store to the app.js component. So essentially, if you have a store, right, it's your components that need to get some kind of information from that store, some kind of data about your state from the store. So we need to provide the store to the app.js component. All right, so how are we going to do that? So basically, if you come to, so this is the app component, right? This is not from where we're going to do it. What we are going to do is we're going to go to our index.js component. So this is index.js right here. And this is where we're going to provide our store to this app component here. So how are we going to do that? So first off, I'm going to come here and I'll import something from React Redux. So I'll come here, I'll say import, and that is going to be provider, starting with a capital letter, by the way, and we're importing it from React Redux. All right, so that's the first thing you need. Now you're also going to import the store. So that store we created, we're going to import it here because that's what we want to provide to our app or to all our components. So I'll come out here and I'll say import store, because it's default import from. So where is it located? Well, /store folder, then /store.js, but we can just say store. Great. So we've imported this provider guy here. Now I will now come down to wrap this app component with this provider. So I'll just say provider. I'll tap that so that I have an opening and a closing tag, and I'll cut the closing tag and wrap it around the app. So it's very similar to what happens when we're working with context, when we say maybe something like theme context.provider, and then we wrap it around the components we want it to, provide some information to. So we're wrapping this with provider, but this opening tag is going to get a property. So it's going to have a store property that's going to be equal to this store we imported from that file we created. So I'll say store here. All right. So essentially, this is how you provide your store to your app. I'll go ahead and save this, and let's look at our instructions. So we've done instruction number 3. So in the next video, we're going to execute instruction number 4. All right, so now where are we in our instructions? I think we've carried out instruction number 3, where we provided the store to the app.js components. So instruction number 4 says we need to use or access that store data from any component that needs them. In our case, we want to use or access them from the counter.js component. So I'm going to come to my counter.js, and how are we going to select a particular data from our store? So we are going to use a hook called useSelector hook that comes from React Redux. So here I'm going to come down here. By the way, before I actually go ahead and start getting the data, I think I should modify this project a little. So you see this state here, I'm going to get rid of it because I don't want to use useState anymore. So let me just get rid of all of this, and I'll get rid of this and that and this as well. So here I'll just have my count. All right, great. So now let's come up here, and for us to get that state from our store, we need to import the useSelector hook, because that's what we can use to select a state from the store or a data or anything from the store. So here I'll first import, import my useSelector hook from React Redux. So you see it auto imported for me. Now I've imported this hook. I cannot use this hook to select a piece of data from the state. Let me show you how you can do that. So I'll put it inside the variable. I'll say const count. I'll call that variable count, and I'll set it to be equal to useSelector Let's open up our parentheses. Now this use selector is going to give us access to the state, and from that we are now going to return the state. Okay, don't like I know this syntax looks funny, but because we can return this, it gives us access to all the state, and now we are returning that state. That state can now be saved in this count. So this is how you do it. Now let's just go ahead and do a console.log of the count. So I'll do console.log and I'll log my count, count, and then I'll go ahead and save that. Let's see what happens. So I'll inspect my page. So let me just open this up and I'll press F12 to inspect, and let's see what we have. And I need to be my console.log. All right, so you can see here we have 0 in this console.log, and that is because if you come to our store, where's our store, right? Of course, the store is receiving this count reducer as an argument. So if you go to the count reducer, you see that we set the state initially to 0. So if I come here, for example, and set this state to 5, and then I save, right? I've saved that. If I come here and refresh this page, you're going to see 5 here. So you see here we have 5 here in the console. Great. So just know that it's pointing to the store, okay, which points to this reducer. And then if you go up to the reducer, you see the state there that we set to whatever number or whatever data type. So I'll come here and make this back to 0. Great. Now let's go ahead and save that. I just want to make sure we're following the instruction. So the instruction number 4 says that we need to use or access the store data from any components, and that is what we just did. All right, so in the next video we are now going to dispatch an action from the respective component. And remember, we said that it's only when we dispatch an action that we can manipulate the data in our store. All right, so in the next video we're going to do that. See you there. All right, now so in the last video we were able to access the data. Let me go to my counter. We're able to access this data or this state from our store using the use selector hook that comes from React Redux. All right, and then so this is it. We saved it inside this variable here, count variable, and then we're able to output it on the screen. So currently you see it's 5, but we changed it to 0. So if I refresh the page, it will become 0. Great. So in our instruction, let's go back to our instruction. So now in the instruction, the last thing we need to do is we want to dispatch an action from the respective components that we are accessing that data from. So for example, in our counter.js, if we want to manipulate this count, we need to dispatch an action from this component. So if you remember how we set up our JSX, we added an onClick here, and the onClick is just calling the respective function. So handle subtract, handle reset, and handle add. Great. However, in the handle subtract and the other functions, they are empty functions. We deleted everything inside. So how do we, let's look at the instruction again. How do we dispatch an action from the respective components? So if you remember what we said in our diagram, so let me actually bring up the diagram. In the diagram, I think I need to, this is going to take a while. So let me just, in the diagram, we said that to dispatch an action, we need to use a hook that comes from React Redux called use dispatch. And that use dispatch hook will send an action, will send the respective action to our reducer function. So let's come down here and let's implement that. Now, so I'll start with the handle subtract. But before then, let's import the use dispatch hook from React Redux. So here I will just add a comma and I'll say use dispatch. Okay. Now I'll come inside of this function here and I would put that use dispatch. I'll attach it to a variable. So I'll say dispatch. So let me say const dispatch tch, and I'll set it to be equal to the use dispatch hook. All right. So instead of using this use dispatch directly, I'll just use this dispatch variable. I hope you see how we're making things a little bit easy for us. Great. Now inside of this handle subtract function, I'll come here and open this up, and then I will dispatch something. Remember, when we dispatch like an action, the minimum information we need to pass to that action is a type. If you remember our reducer tutorial, so I'll say dispatch and I'll open my object because that action is actually an object that has keys and value. So the minimum information is what type of action do you want to dispatch here? Do you want to send to the reducer? So for this first one, I'm going to say subtract. All right. So I'm sending this subtract action from here. I'm dispatching this subtract action from here. And remember, this dispatch is via the use dispatch hook that comes from React Redux. So Redux already knows that anytime this use dispatch hooks is fired, it will first look into the store. So let's come back to our store. It will look into the store and it will look for the reducer function in the store. In this case, it's count reducer. So it will look for the reducer function and then it will go up to that reducer, which is this count reducer here. And then it will say, look, which action type matches the action that was fired from the component. What's the action type fired from this component? Subtract. So it will come to the store and the reducer in the store and say, look, which action type was fired. I've already cut that action type. So here I said if the action.type is equal to subtract, then I want to do something to the state. Well, I want to remove 1 from the state. I want to say state minus 1. Essentially what I just did. Now, so I can come here and I can go ahead and save this guy and let's test it out and see if it works. So I'll come here and hit subtract and it does work. Now, however, if you click reset, nothing is going to happen because we've not wired up our reset. If you click add, nothing is going to happen because we've not wired that up. So we can do that in just a couple of minutes or seconds even. So if you go back to the store, you see that we have actions for the add and reset. So we can just fire those actions or dispatch those actions from our components. So for the handle reset function, which is attached to the handle reset button, so you see the on click here. So the handle reset function, essentially what I'll do is I'll just dispatch an action. So dispatch, and let's open that up. The action is an object, which the minimum information we need to pass is the type. And then I'll set the action type to reset, which is exactly what we cut in our reducer. So you see action type of reset, we've cut that action here. All right, so let's come back here. So now let's dispatch the next action. So I think I'll just save time and copy this guy, and then I'll dispatch the last action for my handle add. I'll paste that in here and I'll change the action type to add. Now if you go ahead and save, let's go and come and test the application one more time. So I'll click on subtract, it works. Reset is back to 0, which is exactly what we set here in our reducer. So you see, whenever the action type is reset, we're going to set the state back to 0. Then for the add, we're going to add 1. So if I click on add, then you see it adds 1. So as it stands now, we've been able to wire up the application using Redux. All right, now there are some other things that we need to do with Redux. For example, in this counter component here, we've just been dispatching an action with just one property of type. Remember also, we can send some data, some information to our reducer from this dispatch, and that is usually set into a payload property. All right, so in the next video, I'm going to show you how we can pass some data from this dispatch to our reducer via payload. All right, thank you so much, and I'll see you in the next one. All right, so now we want to see how we can send some information via payload to our reducer. So what I'm going to do is I'll just come down to my component here, and this add button, I'll just duplicate it. So let me duplicate the add button so that we have another one, and then I'll change this to add 5, because I don't want to add just a single digit. I want to add 5, like 5 numbers to this guy. So when you click on the add 5, this should become 5, 10, 15, and so on and so forth. So I'm going to do that, and here I'm going to change this to handle add number, like so. All right, and basically I'm going to create the handle add number function first. I don't want to get ahead of myself, so I'll copy that and I'll scroll up just below the handle add, I will come down here and I'll create an arrow function that will have the same name, handle add number. Now, I want this handle add number function to pass the information to the reducer, and I'll just call that information amount. So the amount of number I want to send to the reducer. So I'll pass it as a parameter here, amount, because I want it to be dynamic. And then let's come inside here and dispatch a function. So dispatch an action, sorry. So I'll say dispatch, open that up, and let's open the action. First off, we need to specify the type. So the type property I'll set to not just add, but add underscore number, like so. And now I will now specify the payload. Payload is just some data that you're sending to the user. You can call it any other name, but payload is just like a convention, what we like to call it in React, or what we call it in React. So here I'll say payload, load, and then I'll set that payload to this amount here. All right, so let me just type that in like so. Now what this means is that anywhere we fire this handle add number, we need to pass it an argument which will represent the amount. All right, so it's very dynamic, and this needs to be amount, amount. So I'll now come down here to the button where we are firing off this function, and because it's going to have an argument, so because there is an amount parameter here, it means we need to have an argument here. So I want you to add 5 numbers. Because it has this parenthesis here, the right thing to do is to put it into an arrow function, and like this, which we've talked about many times before. All right, so when you click on this add 5 button, this function will fire and send this argument with a dispatch. This argument will be pushed inside of this handle add number as the amount and as a payload. Great, so now let's go ahead and save that, and let's go to our store. Remember, we've not added that into our store, this handle add number. So here, let me just grab this add number. I'll now go to my store, and my reducer is inside my store. So let me duplicate this add functionality to save time. And here I'll say if the action.type is equal to not just add, but add number, then I want to say state plus, not 1, because now the information is coming from the dispatch. And how do we catch the information coming from the dispatch? The information is sent from the dispatch as a payload. So the way you catch it is you say action dot payload, because you remember we are dispatching an action, and the payload is just a property inside of that action. So action dot payload. All right, so at this point, if you fire off this add 5, it should be able to catch that digit you enter there, and then increment the count by that amount. So let me go ahead and save this, and let's test it out. So subtract works, reset works, add works. Now let's do add 5. Okay, so for some reason add 5 does not work. Just a minute, let me just make sure. If action is equal to add number, return state dot action dot payload, which is correct. Okay, so let me just refresh the page, because sometimes I need to refresh the page for it to take effect, because I really don't think anything is wrong with the setup. So subtract works, reset work, add, and add 5. Okay, great, so it works. So if I reset and I click on add 5, then you see now that it's 5, 10, 15, 20, and so on and so forth. So the setup works. So that's how we can send an information from our dispatch. Where is it? That's how we can send an information from our dispatch via the payload. All right, so that's it for this one. I'll see you in the next one. All right, so far we've been able to use Redux to handle state management for this simple counter app, but we are not actually done. There's this logout button, and precisely what I want this logout button to do is I want to make it such that this counter feature you see here would only be shown or displayed on the page when, let's just say, I'm logged in, okay, or when the state is equal to logged in. So for example, if I come to this project here, you see here we have the counter. If I click on log out, then the counter disappears, and you see the text, please log in, and then even the text on the button changes to log in. However, if I click on login, then you see here the counter appears again. Then we now have logout on the button. That's what I want us to achieve. So it's not just managing one, piece of state. We want to be able to manage something like I'll call an auth state. Auth stands for authentication. Authentication is whether a user is logged in or logged out and stuff like that. So let's come back to our project and let's see how we can do that. So first off, let's go to our store. That's how I like us to, work from there and come back. And here, what we just have is this count reducer. So it makes sense for us to have something like an auth reducer. So now let's go ahead and create that. So below the count reducer, in fact, at this point, I can even shrink up the code for the count reducer so that I don't have to do too much scrolling. So let me shrink that up, Control Shift and opening square brackets, and that will shrink it up. Great. Now I can come down here and create an arrow function, which I'm going to create, and I'll call that auth reducer. All right. And it makes sense to have an auth reducer because there are two distinct pieces of states. There's the count state, there's the authentication state, right? So for my auth reducer, of course, it's still going to have a state and an action. And that should be action. And let's open it up. So before I forget, let me return state at the end, like so. Now, however, what is the initial state going to be? All right, so I'm going to set the initial state right here to true, saying that the user is logged in. All right, so I'll set it to true initially. All right, so now let's come inside here and let us catch an action. So here I'll say if, let's open our parentheses and like so. I'll say if action dot type is equal to, and what am I going to call this action? Well, I can just call it toggle auth because it's the same button that will log in and log out. So it's like it's toggling the authentication state. So I'll say if action.type is equal to toggle underscore auth, right? Then I want to do something. I want to manipulate the state, yes? So here I'll say return, and we're going to say state, and we're going to set it to be equal to, initially I said let's set it to false, but because we want to toggle the state, we need to set it to the opposite of what the state currently is. So state is going to be equal to the opposite of state. So if it's true, it becomes false. If it's false, it becomes true. That's it. Now, if you now come down to your store here, you see that we only have the count reducer here. And the way this store works, we cannot just come here and say, okay, we have the count reducer, let's add the other one, let's add auth reducer like this. No, you can't do that. That's not how the structure of the create store work. You can only add one store. Okay, so I'll come here. What that means is if we can only add one store, what that means is we need to find a way to combine both the count reducer. Sorry, you can only add one reducer. Sorry about my mixed grammar. So what that means is that you need to find a way to combine the count reducer and the auth reducer together. Luckily, Redux has a tool that helps us do that. So here I'm going to come here and import something else from Redux. I'll say comma and I'll say combine reducers. All right, and it's this is what's going to give me the ability to combine both reducers. So I'll come here to the bottom here just before my store and I'll combine the reducer. So you know what I'm going to do? I'll create a const, I'll create a variable, I'll call it reducers, plural. That's like, in fact, you can even come here and say all reducers if you like, just to do what you need to do. So I'll say all reducers, but very often you find in other people's maybe code or something, you just find reducers plural. So let's just stick with what is common. So reducers, right? And I'll set it to be equal to combine reducers, which we just created. Open the parentheses. It's inside these combined reducers now that we can now have an object that will now take in all of the reducers we have. So the first reducer we have is our count reducer. So here I'm going to give it a key. I'll give it a key of count and I'll set it to count reducer, like so. I'll add a comma and I'll give the second one, which is the auth reducer, I'll set it to have a property name of is logged in. So it's logged in, and I'll set it to my auth reducer. All right. Now, very often you find some people giving it the same name and value, the same property name and value. So for example, if I copy this guy, I'll just paste it the same. So I'll say I want it to have the same name. So count reducer is equal to count reducer. And in ES6, if the property name and the value is the same, you don't need to specify both of them. You can just specify it once like this. So very often you may see in other people's code where they say combine reducers and you just see the name of the reducer and like that. What that means is they just set the name of the reducer to have the same name and value. Okay, but in my case I want to separate it. I want to say count is equal to count reducer, is logged in is equal to auth reducer. Now I can now come inside this my store, and instead of having my count reducer inside, which I've already combined here, I will now have just this reducers plural inside. So I'll copy that, I'll come here and replace this count reducer with reducers. Okay, and I hope you see how everything is like coming together. Now let's go ahead and save. So effectively we can say that we now have two reducers in our store. We have the count reducer and the auth reducer, and then inside the auth reducer we are catching a particular action, which is toggle auth. Now let's go to our counter and dispatch that action. So I'll come here. So this is the button here. So let's look for the button. Where is it? It's here. This is it here, logout. So on this button I'll add an on click. So let me come here, I'll say on click, and I'll set it to point to a function which I'm going to call, what did I call that function, by the way? Let me just use the same name. I think I called it toggle auth. All right, so I'll say on click should point to a function called toggle auth state. So it's toggle auth, like so. All right, so now let's copy that and let's come here. And there's actually something I just missed out. If you go to our instruction, before you dispatch an action, you actually need to access that data from the component that needs it. All right, so that's what I should have done first. So if I come to my counter, how do we access this count data? We use selector. So what I'm going to do is I'll come down here, right? I'll say const, and I'll call this is logged in, right? It's logged in, and I'll set it to be equal to use selector, like so. Open the brackets, and of course it's still going to have a state. So state is now going to be equal to, initially we just say state is equal to state, but now it's a little bit different. Our setup is a little bit different. So when we say state is equal to state, let's come to our store. What we are saying now is, remember we have a combined reducer, and in the combined reducer is pointing to this count reducer and the auth reducer, but now it now has a property name, and in this case the property name is count, and the second one, the property name is logged in. So I hope you see now that that's the update to our setup. So here in this guy here, sorry, counter. So in this guy here, we're not just going to say count is equal to state is equal to this state is equal to state here. We're going to say state is equal to state dot count. All right, which is going to point to this guy, which is of course is now pointing to our count reducer. So what that means also is for the second one is logged in, we're going to say state dot, let me come back to the store, is logged in. So state dot is logged in. So I'll come back here and then I'll complete that. I'll say state dot is logged in. And of course this error on the page is because we've not created the toggle auth function. So let's just come here quickly and create an arrow function, and the arrow function will just have the toggle, sorry, not the toggle auth, so toggle auth, like so. And if you save that, this error should disappear. So let me just refresh the page, and all right, great. So you see the error has disappeared. Now what I want us to do now is let's log console.log the count and the is logged in. So I'll just duplicate this guy and I'll change this to is logged in, like so. And let's go ahead and save. Now remember that we set in our store, in this reducer state, in this auth reducer, we set is logged in state initially to true. So let me inspect this page. I'll press F12 on my keyboard and open that up, and let's see what we have in our console. So you see we have the value here of the count, which is 0, and we have the is logged in state logged here to true, because that's what we set it initially. It's now time for me to introduce you to Redux. So if I come here and click on this arrow here at the bottom, you see Redux. Remember that dev tool we installed. So if you open Redux here, you will see this powerful setup that we have. Now click on this state. You'll see now this state now is giving us the count and the is logged in. And you see count is 0, is logged in is true. If I increase the count by 1, you see it also changes here. And then even the action that was fired off in the dispatch is logged here. So what this means is that with Redux we can debug our project very smoothly, because we are seeing everything that is happening, we are seeing everything that's changing and stuff like that. If I subtract, you see here it's back to 0, and we have the action that was fired. If you like, you can jump back, you can jump back, and you see if you click on jump, it takes us back to the previous action 1. So Redux is just a fantastic, Redux dev tool is just a fantastic helper to help us see what's going on in our project. All right, so now we've been able to create the auth state. In the next video, let me look at this. Where am I currently? All right, so we've been able to create the auth state, and what we just need to do is in the counter.js, let's come here. In our toggle auth function, we just need to add a dispatch. So I'll just come here and say dispatch. Let's open that up and open up the action, which is the object, and we're going to set a type, type. And remember what we are catching in our store. What are we catching in our auth reducer? We are catching a type of toggle auth. So I'll copy that, and let's come here and dispatch it. So I'll dispatch an action with a type of toggle auth, which will fire off, and this reducer is going to catch that action, and then it will execute this by altering the state or by toggling the state. So now let's come back to the project and let's test it out. So if I click on logout, nothing happens. But wait, let me do that again. So I'll log out. So something is definitely wrong here. Oh, I need to refresh the page. So let me refresh the page so that you see how everything works. So I'll click on logout again. So remember, it's logged in is equal to true. So let me click on logout, and you see now it's logged in has been changed to false. If I click that again, then it changes it back to true, and you can see the action that is being fired. All right, so in the next one, we're now going to add the logic that will hide all of this counter when we click on this button. All right, thank you so much for this one. I'll see you in the next one. All right, so far when we click on this logout button, right, we are able to toggle the is logged in states like true and false and all of that. We're able to toggle it. So what we need to do now is we need to affect this UI based on this is logged in state. So I'm going to minimize this guy here, and let's come to counter.js file component, and then I'll scroll down to my return statement. So basically what I want to do is I want to display this counter only when it's logged in is true, not just the counter, everything inside of the counter. So let me just shrink it up, yeah, like this. So this is where the head, this is where it starts, and I think it ends here. So it ends here, this div. Great. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to come to the top here, and I'll open my, I'll tap that and open curly braces, and I'll say that if is logged in is equal to, is not equal to true. So let's start with the false part. So if it's logged in is equal to false, then I'll use my ternary operator. Then I want to display a text, and basically it will just say please log in. So I'll make it a paragraph. So let me just do that and display a paragraph, and I will say please log in. So now let's come to the else block. So else, now for the else part, I'm going to open up my parenthesis like this, and then I'll just separate it, and I'll put everything inside a React fragment, right? So let me grab everything here up to the div. Yeah, so up to this place, I'll cut it, Control X to cut, and then I'll put it inside this React fragment and paste that in. All right, great. So essentially, when it's logged in is equal to false, we are going to see this please login. When it's equal to true, we are going to see the components. So let me save that and let's actually try it out. So I'll expand this guy, and for some reason, I don't know, I may need to refresh it. So I'll refresh and I'll click on logout, and as you can see, we now have this please login. And if you look at it's logged in here, you see that it's equal to false. Now the last thing we need to do is we need to make the text on this button conditional. All right, so when it's logged in is equal to false, then I want to change this. I don't want it to be log out because I'm already logged out anyway, so I want it to be log in. How are we going to do that? So I'm going to come here, and this is where the logout text is. So let me get rid of that, Control X. I'll open my curly braces. I'll say if is logged in is equal to true. In other words, if the user is logged in, then I want the text inside of this button to be logout. All right, else I want it to be login. So log in. Great. Now let's go ahead and save that, and let's come back to our application. All right, so you see it already took effect. So here, okay, so I'll log out, and as you can see, what we have inside the button is log in, and we cannot see the counter app. However, if I log in, then we have our counter app, and of course our counter app still works very nicely. So I'll reduce it. You see here the state is changing, and we can see the action that's been fired. I'll reset, I'll add, and then I'll add 5, and everything works nicely. All right, so far we've been able to set up Redux, right? But the setup is not complete. The way Redux is set up is that all of these things are separated into their different files and folders. Really, the reducer, for example, has its own folder and files. The actions, they are separated into their own files, but I did it together like in a single store and put everything inside the components, this counter components, so that at least we can be able to understand everything that's going on. Now it's time for us to now break this down into the separate files that they should be in. All right, thank you so much, and I'll see you in the next one. All right, so now let's start by separating our reducers into their own separate files. So I'll come here, and inside of our store, this is our Redux store for our Redux setup. I'm going to create another folder inside. I'll call this reducers, plural, because there are going to be more than one. All right, great. Now we have two reducers. If you go to our store, you see that we have the count reducer and the auth reducer. So I'm going to come inside of my store and then the reducer folder, and I'm going to create the two reducers actually. So I'll start by creating the count reducer.js. Let's hit enter on that, and then let's create the auth reducer.js as well. Is that a dot or a comma? So that .js, and hit enter. Great. So we have two separate files for our reducers. Now let's go ahead and extract our reducer from our store into those files. So we'll start with the count reducer. I'll come here, I'll grab the count reducer like this, I'll cut it out, and I'll go to my count reducer.js and paste that in. Now if I'm pasting it here, I don't actually need it here. I need it in another folder, in another file, which is the store file. So I'll come here, therefore, and I'll export it. So I'll say export, and I'll export it as a default export. I'll call it count reducer, like so. So I've exported it. Now I can use this reducer from anywhere I want. I'll go ahead and save this file, and let's go back to our store. So for us to be able to use the count reducer inside of our combined reducers, then I need to import it. So I'll come here and say import, what did I call it? Call it count reducer, and I'll import it from this area where it's located. Now this count reducer can now be used inside of our combined reducer. So this is it here, count reducer, and it will work perfect. In fact, I'll go ahead and save that, and let's test out the application to make sure it still works. So subtract, and you see it works. Great. Next, let's extract this auth reducer. So let's go ahead and cut out the auth reducer. Control X to cut it out, and I'll go to my auth reducer file and paste that in. Then I'll come down and export it. So because to use it in the store, you need to export it first. So I'll come here and export auth reducer. Oh, I'll export it as a default export. So default auth reducer, and that's spelled correctly. And then let's go ahead and save. So now I'll come to my store and I'll import auth reducer. So I'll come here, I'll say import auth reducer from the place where it's located, which is this guy here. Now what that means is that in my combined reducer, I can now use the auth reducer. And if I go ahead and save this, let's test it out and see if it works. And I'll log out, and you see the auth reducer still works. Count reducer works as well. All right, great. So now we've been able to export the reducer file. In the next one, we're going to export the actions. All right, I'll see you in the next one. All right, now we've been able to export our reducers into their own files. Next, we're going to export our actions. So if you go to our counter.js, you see that all our actions are here. So from the handle subtract to the reset and all of them. All right, so the way Redux is set up, the actions are also, in their own dedicated folder and files respectively. So I'm going to come back to our store, and I think I can close this component. So we're going to come back to our store, and inside of our store, we're going to create another folder. I'm going to call that folder action. All right, so here I'll say actions, plural, and then I'll hit enter. Now inside of this action folder, I'll create just a single file. I'll do like this, and I'll say action.js. And inside of this action.js is where I'll now bring in all my actions. Now you can, even if you have a large project, you can go ahead and split the actions into their different files. So for example, you can say counter action.js and slot in the counter action there. You can say auth action.js and slot in the action, but because this is a very small project, I'll just slot in everything inside this actions.js file. Great. So first off, let's go to our counter and let's drag the actions out. Let's extract the actions one after the other. So I'll start by extracting this handle subtract. So let's get it, and I'll cut it actually. So Control X, and I'll take it to my actions, and then I'll paste it in. Now it looks like, oh, okay, this is fine, we can just save this file and go, but actually we can't. Like if we do, it's going to break the application. Let me tell you why it's going to break the application. Because this dispatch, it doesn't exist in this action.js file. So if you come to our counter, you see here that first off we imported, let me close this folders guy here. You see that first off we imported use dispatch from React Redux. We can import use dispatch from React Redux in our actions.js file here, but to use it, it has to be used inside a function like this. Sorry, where is the function? So this counter arrow function here, the use dispatch, which is this guy here, can only be used or called inside of a function, and in our actions we don't have any function. All right, so if I come here, you see that we just have the action. There's no like a special function where we're going to add this dispatch, where we're going to add use dispatch, sorry. So what that means is that we're going to get rid of this dispatch. So I'll delete it and delete the closing guy, and here I'll change it to a simple return. So here I'll say return like that. All right, so I've changed it here. So what that means is that I'm going to grab the remaining part of my actions here. So I'll go to counter and I'll grab all the corresponding actions, or all the remaining actions. I'll cut them out, and then I'll bring them to my actions and paste them in. So I'll come down here and paste them in. And of course, remember, we don't have the use dispatch hook here, so we're going to have to delete this dispatch here. Don't worry, you see how we'll handle it. So I'll delete that, and I'll delete that here as well, and here, and I'll delete that here as well, and here as well. And for the last one, I'll also delete it here and here. So of course, remember, we need to add our return statement. So I'll just highlight the curly braces, the opening curly braces, all of them. So let me do that here, and I'll just add the return text. So I'll say return, and as you can see, it's in all of them. All right, now I can go ahead and save this file. So basically, I've been able to restructure or modify the structure of my actions. Now the next thing we need to do is we need to actually export these actions here from here so that they can be used in any other place. So I'll just come to the front here, and before the const, I would highlight everything so that I can write the export text as once. I'll just come here and say export and give space. All right, so now I've been able to export them and I can use them anywhere. Let's go ahead and save this. So now for us to use them inside of our counter.js, we need to first import them from that actions file. So I'll come here and I'll say, I'll come to the next line and I'll say import. Let's open our curly braces, and the first one is handle subtract. So handle subtract. Okay, yeah, I expected that to help me out. So handle subtract, then I have handle add. Let me just do it myself. Then I have handle reset. Then I have handle add number, like so. Then the last one I have what's the last one? Toggle auth. So toggle auth, like so. And for some reason this handle add number is grayed out, so let me check that actions and make sure. So handle add number, it's there. Let me copy it and make sure I didn't have a typographical error. Oh, I think there was a mistake here, so let me paste that in. Okay, great. So I'm importing all of these functions which hold the action from, where are they located? They are located inside my actions folder. So that's where am I currently? I'm in the counter, so I need to go outside of the counter. So // help me, and then I need to go into the store, and in the store I need to go into the actions folder. Then I need to have the access to the actions.js. Great. So basically I've imported all of the functions that hold all of those actions. Now I can't save this now. If I save it, there's still a problem because the dispatch is not factored in anymore, so it's not going to work. So how are we going to factor in that dispatch? Because we need this. Let me show you something here. This dispatch here, we need to use it to fire off this function, right? Or to fire off these respective actions. So what I'm going to do is I'll come to the part of the code where, let me start from the first one, which is handle auth. Yeah, so this on click here, you see we are pointing to the toggle auth function, which is what we imported here. Now we're not going to point to it directly like this. You know how we're going to do it? We're going to add the dispatch here. So instead of just saying toggle auth, I'll say, come here, I'll say dispatch patch, and then I'll wrap the toggle auth function. Okay, now remember, whenever you're calling a function on your on click like this and you're wrapping it with parentheses, it means you're executing it immediately, and React doesn't want that. So we need to open this with an arrow function. So I'll open my arrow function like that, and then I'll say dispatch auth. Okay, sorry, I'll say dispatch, and then there'll be the toggle auth statement or text inside here. Now the last thing we need to do is we actually need to call this toggle auth function. So I'll open my parentheses inside. So this dispatch, within this dispatch function here, we're now calling this toggle auth function, right? This is just the syntax and how you need to do it. Now, guess what? We need to replicate this same thing for the remaining functions. So to make it actually fast, what I'm going to do is let me bring this on click to the next line, and this is where the on click ends. So I'll just grab this on click like this. I'll copy that and I'll just replicate it. So this is for the handle subtract. So I'll just delete everything we have here and paste that in and change the text, this function text inside to handle subtract. Okay, then let's do that for the remaining ones. And it looks like something is wrong here. Okay, so I think I maybe, oh, okay, so I mistakenly removed the closing tag. That's the problem I had there. All right, so I have to do that again. I'll delete that and paste that in and change the toggle auth to handle subtract. So handle subtract like that, and then let's do the next one, which is handle reset. So let's grab everything from the on click, delete that, paste in what we copied, and then change the text here to handle, which one is this? Reset, I think. Handle reset. Then the last one is handle add, not the last one actually, second to last. So let's delete this guy, paste that in, and change the text here to handle add. So handle add. Then for the last one, handle add number. Okay, so you see we're already calling the handle add number with this arrow function syntax. All right, so it's kind of close to what we're already doing. Anyway, I'm just going to come here, I'll delete everything, and then I'll paste in, oh, I think I deleted the, okay, so I'll just delete everything like this, and I'll paste in my copied guy, and then I'll change this to handle, oh sorry, that needs to be handle. So handle add number, let's copy that, and then I'll give it my argument of 5. Sorry, that should be 5. Great. So essentially we've been able to add this dispatch to fire off all the actions that we just transferred to this action.js file. Now let me go ahead and save, and all things being equal, this should actually work great. So I'll come here, subtract, and you see we get 5. Reset, we're back to 0. Add, we're back to 1. Add 5, and that works. And then if I log out, log in, everything works just perfect. So far we've been able to separate the reducer and the actions to their own separate files. All right, thank you so much, and I'll see you in the next one. All right guys, so at this point we can say that, okay, yeah, we're done setting up our reducer, everything works fine, but there's just one or two optimizations I probably would like to talk about before we head on to the next topic, and that is the fact that for our actions, so let me come to our actions, we're actually typing out our action, we are like typing it out, we're hard coding it in. If for any reason you make a mistake here, maybe a typographical error, then your application is going to crash. Okay, and for a project, for a large project where, or a large business where you have multiple developers working on the single project, you probably don't want, you know, to have everybody typing out the actions like this. So what we're going to do is inside of our actions folder, and we have so many tabs open, let me just close some of them. So I'll close the instruction, I'll close the store, I will leave the reducers open, I'll close the app, close the index, and I'll just leave it open like this. Great. So what we need to do is inside of our actions folder, I'm going to create another file. I'll call it action types.js. all right, and I'll hit enter, and then inside this file, essentially what I'm going to do is I'll create an object. So that object will hold all of our action types. So I'll say const, and I'll call that object actions, so capital letter actions, and then it's going to be equal to, now let's open this up. Now the first one is subtract, yes, so capital letter, I'll say subtract, and I'll set it to the text subtract. All right, now I'll add a comma here and do the same for reset, add, and the rest of them. So here, let's just come down here and do that quickly. I'll just duplicate this to how many times? Yeah, So this one, I'm going to say, this one is going to be reset. So reset. And this one is going to be add. And I'll say add here. And then this one is going to be, I can't remember the name of the last one. I think it's add numbers or something like that. So add number. So let me just grab it, copy that. And here I'll say add number. Paste that in. And the last one is going to be toggle auth. So here, sorry. And here, and I'll say toggle auth. Toggle underscore auth. All right, so what this means is that I've saved all my actions inside this object. I can now export these objects. Export, that needs to be small letter by the way, so export. So I'm exporting this actions object. I can now access it from anywhere I want. So instead of hard coding, like I'll come to my actions now, instead of hard coding this subtract here and all of these guys here, we just need to import the actions. So here I'll say import and actions from action.types. All right, so let's bring this down and let's close this folder here. So I'm importing actions from that file where it's located. Now I don't need to now hard code these guys here. All I need to say is I'll just point to my action plural dot, and then it will suggest all the properties inside that actions for me. And for some reason it's not suggesting it, so let me do Ctrl+Z first and save this file. So import actions from here. So here let's come here. Oh, okay, we need to get rid of the quotes. So I don't even need to place it inside the quote because now I want to reference the object. So I'll say actions plural dot, and watch what happens. So I get all the properties. So dot subtract, and then I can come here and do the same. This is going to be actions. So let me just copy the actions as a word. So actions dot, and then what do we have here? Let's see, reset. Okay, so actions dot reset. All right, this is going to be actions dot add. So let's do actions dot add, and the next one is going to be actions dot add number. So let's grab that, actions dot add number. Is there any other one? Okay, toggle auth. So actions dot toggle auth. Actions dot toggle auth. So you see, now there's some kind of safety that, you know, we're not going to make a mistake because we are getting our actions from one single source. All right, now I can go ahead and save. If I save this file, nothing is going to go wrong. I can come here, subtract, and it works. Reset, it works. But to still be on the safe side, we're going to implement the same thing in our reducer. So I'll come to my auth reducer, sorry, my count reducer first, and let's come here and import action. So I'll say import actions from, where is it located? So this is where it's located, right? And we're just going to repeat the same thing here. I know it's kind of repetitive, but that's just what we need to do. So actions dot, and the first one subtract, and this one is going to be actions dot add. So actions dot add, this one is going to be action dot add number dot add number, and then the next one dot reset dot reset, and the last one, oh okay, so those are the four we have here. So let me go ahead and save this file, and great, everything still works. Now for the last one, we just need to import it for the, so let me copy that and import it in the auth reducer. So I'll come here, paste that in like so, actions, import actions from auth reducer, and then I just need to do it once. So instead of saying toggle auth, all I just need to say is actions dot and toggle auth. Great. So I'll go ahead and save. I know this looks like, oh, is it really necessary? But if you're working on a large project, you're going to see the importance of having all your actions saved somewhere such that you don't have to make a typographical error in your application and start, you know, running around and looking for what you did wrong. Okay, so essentially that's one way we can optimize our project. So at this point I can actually say that, okay, to an extent we're done with setting up Redux. And all right, so that's about it for this section. So in the next section we're going to talk about something that makes using Redux a lot easier to set up. Okay, and that is Redux Toolkit. All right, I'll see you in the next one. All right, so in this one, we're going to talk about Redux Toolkit. What is Redux Toolkit? Anyway, it's just a slightly modified version of Redux that makes our lives a little bit easier. So the team that built Redux, they sat down at some point and they were like, wow, using this solution to manage our state is actually really complex, and it's is there a way we can make it easier? So that's probably what they asked themselves, and then they came up with Redux Toolkit. Redux Toolkit greatly simplifies the use of Redux when we work with React. So how does it work? Now I'm going to show you a slide quickly. So let me just expand this guy and let's see how Redux Toolkit work. So initially, this is the structure of our store. So we have a store folder, and inside that folder we have a reducer folder that contains our reducer. We also have an actions folder that contains actions.js, which holds our actions. And then lastly we have store.js, which contains our store. All right, so just a quick refresher. Let me show you what that is. I think it's this one. Yeah, so this is it. So if you look at our store, this is the store. Inside the store we have the actions folder that contains our actions, so actions.js, and then we have the reducers that contains all our reducers, and then there's this store.js file. Some people can name this store.js index.js, whatever, but I'm sure the concept is clear. So now let me go back down. So this is what I just demonstrated here. Now what Redux Toolkit modifies is it takes our reducer functions and our actions and it puts them into a single file. That file is called a slice. So the team that built Redux, they sat down and said, look, instead of having the reducer function in a different file and having the actions in another file, why don't we put them together in their own separate file? So they call that a slice. So now if I want to modify this project to Redux Toolkit, with Redux Toolkit, I'm going to create what is known as an auth slice for my authentication reducer and the actions associated with it, and my counter slice that will hold my count reducer and the actions associated with the count reducer. So that's the first modification when you want to switch to Redux Toolkit. The next modification is that they said, look, this store.js, we need to actually find a way to make it a little bit better. So they replaced the create store method with this configure store. So let me quickly show you what that means. So in our store.js, which is, okay, I think I need to open it. So in our store.js, we have this create store. So this is how we create a store, right? So we import create store from Redux, and then we create a variable where we put in that create store, right? So they said, look, let's change this create store. So they replaced this create store with configure store. And how does that make it better? So in this create store, currently we have to import this combine reducer, and we have to first combine all the reducers we have, and then we can now slot it inside of our store. But with the new replacement, which is configure store, we don't have to combine any reducer. We can insert numerous amount of reducers inside our store directly. So that makes our lives a little bit easier. That's number one. Number two, we don't even have to add this piece of code here to have Redux monitor and show us our state in our browser, in our console, Redux console. That is automatically added for us. So it makes our life a lot easier when we work with Redux. So just a quick recap, with Redux Toolkit, the reducers and the actions are merged into what is known as a slice. So we're going to have auth slice and counter slice. Then in the store.js file, or in our store, instead of using create store to create our store, we use a new method called configure store. So those are the two differences we need to take note of when we work with Redux Toolkit. So what we're going to do next is we're going to take that project and convert it using Redux Toolkit. See you in the next one. All right, now let's convert a project from the regular Redux to Redux Toolkit. So I updated my instructions file, and this is going to be a little bit more specific to our project. So the first thing we need to do is we need to actually install Redux Toolkit. So this is the command line you use to install it for npm, right? If you go to the website Redux Toolkit and you click on get started, you see, so this is for npm. If you use yarn package manager, then you can just do yarn Redux Toolkit, yarn add Redux Toolkit. Okay, so but I use npm, so I'll just right click and I'll copy that, and let's come inside of my terminal, my free terminal here, and I'll just paste that in and hit enter. So this will install Redux Toolkit in addition to the setup I already have. So the installation is complete, and just to confirm, you can come to your package JSON file, and here you see we now have at redux.js/toolkit. Great, so we have it installed. All right, so I'll close that up and let's go back to our instructions. So what does the number one say? It says combine our reducer and actions into a slice. All right, so I'm going to come here in my folder and let's go to our store. So this is our store, and see we have actions reducer. So what I'm going to do is inside this store, I'm going to create a folder, and I'll call that folder slice. And inside this folder, the first slice I'm going to create is the counter slice. So I would come here and create a new file, and I'll call that counter slice. You can call it counter.js if you like, but I just prefer to call it counter slice because that's like what I want to create. So how do you actually go about creating a slice? So first off, you need to import something from Redux Toolkit. So here I'm going to come here and say import. Let's open a curly braces, and I'll say create slice. Okay, and I'm hoping that Redux Toolkit will help me auto import it, but for some reason it's not picking. So I'll say create slice from, and let's import it from at Redux. So at redux.js/toolkit. Okay, it helped me out. Now the structure of a slice is a little bit different, so let me show you how we create a slice. And remember, we said that a slice will contain our reducer and our actions. Great. So I'll come here and I'll create my slice. So I'll say const, I'll call that slice counter slice. So the same name, counter slice, and I'll set it to be equal to create slice. So let's create the slice like this, and let's open that up like that. Inside of this create slice, we're going to have an object, and that object will have some properties, right? Great. So the first property we want to give this object is a name. Okay, and I'll call this the name of this slice, I'll just give it a name of counter like that. I'll add a comma and I'll come down. Next property, the next property we're going to give it is an initial state. So let me actually be looking at my count reducer. So if you look at this count reducer, you see that we actually gave it a state and we set it to be 0. This 0 is actually the initial state for this our count reducer. So in my slice, I'm also going to have an initial state property. So here I'll say initial state, and that is going to be an object too. So I'll open that up and I'll say count and I'll set it to 0. All right, so you see what's going on. We've created a name for this counter. We just called it this counter slice. We called it counter. Now we've given it an initial state and we gave it the property of count and set the value to 0. All right, now let's come here, I'll add a comma, and then I'll come to the next line. I will now add my reducer. So here I'll say reducer, and it's also an object. So let's open that up. Now, if you look at this reducer very well, you see that the only thing we're doing inside this reducer is, aside the fact that we had these actions here, we were saying that look, if the action.type is equal to this, so we're catching the action type and doing something based on the action type that we caught from the dispatch. All right, great. So now inside of this reducer, we're just going to go straight and define our actions. So here we're going to have our actions. All right, so you see how Redux is already making things a little bit easier. We have a reducer inside this slice, and inside the reducer we have our actions directly. So now we're going to specify our actions. So the first action, I'll just call it let me do okay, let me just do add. So the first action, let's say we want to add something as the first action, so that's the text add. Now we are now going to open this with an arrow function. So I'll come here and then I'll open that. I know it's looking like, oh, there are too many objects in here, but just stick with me, it's going to get a little bit easier. Now for this add, we are now going to call our state. So remember in this what's it called, let me come to the count reducer, we receive the state and the action. Okay, so here in our counter slice, this is where we are now going to reference our states like this. All right, great. So basically, what do we do when the action type is that of add? We set the state plus 1. So in this our counter slice, there is even something extra we can do. So basically in this our counter slice, we can come here, we'll say states, and you know we need to point to this our initial state here. So and the initial state, we give it a name of count. So I'll say state dot count, and I can go ahead and say plus 1, and that will be fine. That's actually going to work. But you know what, this new Redux toolkit, this Redux toolkit we installed, under the hood it has an additional package. That package is known as IMA, right? That package enables us to mutate the state in like a kind of unique way that React does not really permit if you don't have IMA installed. I know this is looking like jargons, but basically, oh no, this should not be state.count equal plus 1. This should be state.count, and I'm going to set it to state.count plus 1. Oh, sorry, I need to be equals. So state.count will be equal to state.count plus 1. This is actually how it should be. But because of that IMA that we have installed, right, what we can do is we can then just do like this and delete all of this guy like this and say state.count. I will now say plus equals 1. Okay, so this is like saying state.count is equal to state.count plus 1. So I'm just shortening it with regular JavaScript. All right, so in Redux Toolkit, this is permitted. So now I've added the action for the add. Next thing I need to add for the subtract. So let's go ahead and add a comma here and duplicate this add action. So I'll just duplicate it downwards, and then I'll change this to subtract. So this is gonna be subtract, and then it will be state.count minus equals 1. All right, so this is like saying state.count is equal to state.count minus 1. This is actually just plain vanilla JavaScript, right? Anyway, let's continue. So what do we have next? We have the reset. So let's come down here and I'll duplicate this, and I'll change this to reset. And for the reset, what do we do? Well, we just set the state.count to be equal to 0. So I'll come here and say 0, and that's it for the reset. Then lastly, we have one other action. So let's come here, and that is add number. And basically for the add number, we are we're using the payload. We're adding the payload to the state because that payload is coming from the dispatch. So I'm going to come here and maybe I should put it up top here, because after add I just want to have add number. So here I'll come here and say add underscore number. Okay, and we're going to get a payload. So instead of just saying state here, I'm going to say state comma, and then I'll say action. Okay, so this needs to be small letter, so action. Now you probably notice something. You'll be like, why didn't I add the action here in the remaining parts here? Because in this our count reducer, we added the state and the action as parameters for this our reducer function. Well, in Redux Toolkit, we don't need to actually add the action if we're not using it. So that makes our lives a little bit easier, I would say. So for this add number, what we are going to do here now is we're going to say state.count plus equals, we're now going to come here and say action dot payload, which is what we expect. We expect this payload to come from the dispatch. Okay, so essentially in this Redux toolkit, of course, it's going to take you maybe some time to get used to it because you've learned the regular Redux. It's going to take you some time to get used to it, but once you get used to this, it makes your life a lot easier because you just have one slice that handles both your action and your reducer in one go. Okay, so this is what we need to do. So we've successfully converted the count reducer and count action to one file. All right, so I'll go ahead and save this, and of course, we can't do anything much with this because we've not updated several parts of the application. All right, so in the next one last thing before we go is that I will export this slice. Okay, so this counter slice, I'm going to export it. You know how I'm going to export it? I'll come down here, I'll say export, and I'll do a default export. So I'll say export default and counter slice, and I'm not interested in the whole counter slice. For now, I'm interested in this reducer. Okay, so I'll say export counter slice dot reducer. Okay, so that's my default export. Now this my action, so this add action, add number, subtract and reset, I am also going to export them. So I'll come down here and I'll have my second export statement. So I'll say export, and it's going to be named export. So I'll say export const. You know what, let me just define it first. So I'll say const, I'll open my curly braces, and I'll destructure all of these my actions here. So the first one is going to be add, then we have add underscore number, then we have subtract, oh sorry, it needs to be subtract, then lastly we have reset. Then I'm going to destructure it into my counter slice dot action. So these are the actions. So I'll come here and say counter slice, which needs to be small letter, so counter slice dot actions. All right, now I'll now export it. So export. So basically by exporting these actions, I can access them from any components in my React application. All right, so this is how you can create a slice, combine your reducer, your actions, and export them so that they can be used in other places. All right, like I said, it's going to take some time getting used to this, but once you get used to it, you're going to absolutely enjoy it. Thank you so much, and I'll see you in the next one. All right, now let's go ahead and create the auth slice. So we've created the counter slice. Now we'll create the auth slice. So I'll come here inside my slice folder. I'll create another file. I'll call it auth slice.js. And you know what, to make things a little bit faster, I'll just grab my counter slice, just grab everything inside it, copy it, and paste it inside the auth slice. Now let's go ahead and modify. So let me close this guy up. So I'll import create slice from React Redux Toolkit. That's fine. I'll change the name here to auth slice. So this is going to be auth slice, and I'm also going to change the name here to auth slice. So everywhere we have counter slice, I'll change it to auth slice. So here as well. Okay, then what am I going to call the name? What this name value here, or this name property here, I'll call it auth. So just simple auth. And the initial state, I'll change the property of this initial state to is logged in, and I'll set it initially to true. True, which is what I actually did for my reducer. So let me actually show you my auth reducer. So you see, this is my auth reducer, and you see the state, I set it initially to true, and if the action type is this toggle auth, then I will just toggle the state. That's what I did, just a reminder. Now, so we've set the initial state. Now for the reducer, we have just one action inside our auth reducer. So I'm just going to delete these other actions here, so these other actions can go. So we have just one action, and the name of that action is toggle auth. So toggle underscore auth. And basically, let me just look at my auth slides one more time. So basically, I'm toggling the auth. I'm setting the state to the opposite of the state. So I'll come to my auth slice, and here, instead of saying state.count, we're going to say state.is logged in. So I'll come here, I'll say state.is, sorry, small letter, is logged in, right? And I'm going to set it to be equal to the opposite of state.is logged in. So the opposite of state dot is logged in. Okay, so I'm just flipping it. If it's true, it will become false. If it's false, it will become true. Now, one more thing though, we'll come here and we'll export this toggle auth action. So I'll come here, let's get rid of all of this, we don't have them here, and I'll just export the toggle auth action and auth slice.action. Great. So in just a couple of minutes, we've created our auth slice. So this is one of the advantages of Redux. It's super easy. Once we set it up, it's super easy to expand our application and stuff like that. Okay, great. So at this point, I'll go ahead and save this file, and let's look at our instructions. So instruction number 1 says combine the reuser and actions into a slice. We've done that for the 2 slices we have. Then instruction number 2 says replace create store with configure store. So we're going to break this, and in the next video we're going to replace the create store with configure store. See you in the next one. All right, so now let's go ahead and implement instruction number 2, which is to replace create store with configure store. So where's our store? I think I closed my store, so let me open the store, which is store.js. Great. So remember, we imported create store from Redux and combine reducer from Redux. So what we are going to do is, let me come up top here, and I'm going to import configure store from Redux Toolkit. All right, and so here we created a variable, and this is we create store. So let me just come up here, and before I delete that, let me create another variable. So I'll say const, and I'll call that store as well, and it's going to be equal to configure store, like so. Let's open that up, and we're going to now open an object inside it. Now inside of this object, we're going to have a reducer property. So here I'll say reducer, and this reducer is also going to be an object that will open up. Now inside this reducer is where we can now list all our reducers, or all our slices. Okay, so remember, in our slice, let me come here, and so we have 2 slides. We have the counter slice, which we exported. So you see, we exported the reducer, counter slice.reducer, and then we also exported the auth slice.reducer. So we've exported the reducer, we can access them anywhere, and we exported them as default exports. Great. So let's come back to our store and import them. And I think at this point I will actually get rid of all of these guys, because we are not using them like that again. So let's import our slice reducer. So I'll say import, and I'm actually going to call it let's start by importing the count. So I'll say count reducer, because it's a, what's it called, it's a default export. I can name it anything I want. So I can say import count reducer from, let's do like this, and we need to go into our, so where are we right now? We're in the store, so we need to go into our slice folder. So slice, and then we need to now locate the counter slice. So import the count reducer from counter slice. So this count reducer here is going to, let me show you something, it's going to catch this counter slice.reducer, because we gave it a default export. We made it a default export. In this place where we are importing it, we can name it whatever we want. It's going to know that, okay, it's going to look for the default and import it. So I'm going to do the same. I'll come here and I'll say import, and this is going to be auth reducer from, and let's locate it. So dot forward slash slice forward slash auth reducer. All right, so auth slice, sorry. Great. So I've imported the two reducers from where they're located. Now this combined reducer, I don't need it anymore, so I can get rid of it. Okay, and let me get rid of this comment. Now inside of this reducer objects here, I can then specify these two reducers. Okay, so you see how the configure store is a little bit cleaner than the create store method that comes with just regular Redux. So here I'm going to give it a name. So I'll say counter, and I'll set it to counter reduce count reducer. So count reducer, I'll add a comma, I'll come to the next line and I'll say auth, and I'll point it to auth reducer as well, and that's it. Now you remember that in the previous setup where we use create store, we had to import this, we had to add this line of code so that it can be registered in our Redux toolkit. However, in configure store method, we don't need this line of code. So essentially at this point, I can even get rid of all of this, and let's see how clean our code is. Okay, so you see how clean our code is. We have our configure store that catches all our reducers and we export it. That's it essentially. So I can go ahead and save this file. All right, so if I go to my instructions, what do we have to do next? Well, we have to update our selectors, our use selector and use dispatch hooks that comes from Redux. So we're going to do that on the component that is using them, which is the counter component, and we're going to do that in the next video. All right, so for the final instruction on this Redux toolkit set of instructions, we need to update the use selector and the use dispatch hook on the component that is using them. In this case, it's our counter.js. So this counter.js here. Great. So let's scroll up and see how. So we created the use selector, and let me just clear out these actions because we're not going to be using the actions again. So let me clear them out. All right, so this is our use selector hook. So for the count, we just set it to state.count, but that's not what applies. So when we say state, right, let me, these things are just so many here. Let me close them. So reducer, I'm closing the reducer file, I'm closing the action files. So I just have my store and my slice. All right, I think that's fine. So when we say state.count here, we need to change this. So first off, let me delete this guy. So I'll say state dot, and when you say state dot, it will look inside your store. All right, so it looks inside your store and it looks inside this reducer. And what we have is counter. This property here is counter. So what that means is that you come here to our counter.js and we'll say state dot counter. That's not all. Now by pointing to state dot counter, let's go back to our store. It will now look inside this count reducer, which is coming from our slice. So let's go to our counter slice here, and I'll scroll up. You see here that we set the initial state. So is this state we're actually interested in? And what do we give this state? We gave it a property of count. All right. So I'll come here. What that means is that we'll say state.counter.count. All right. So now it's properly pointing to where it needs to point to. Then for the is logged in that we set here also, we're not going to point to state.isLoggedIn. We're going to point to state dot. Let's do one more time. So I'll go to auth, and you see here, oh sorry, we'll go to store, and you see here it's pointing to this property here, auth. All right, so I'll come here and I'll say state.auth, and if you look inside the auth, so I'll go back to my store. So this is the auth and it's pointing to our auth reducer. So let's come to our auth slice, and you see here that we have an initial state which has a property name of is logged in. So I'll come here, this will now be state.auth.isLoggedIn. All right, so I hope you see how we linked it up, how it changed in this Redux toolkit. Great. So now we've updated our selector. The next thing is we need to update the way we dispatch an action. And remember, we create this dispatch here, and so this is fine. It's pointing to use dispatch. However, we need to come inside our dispatch, right? because now we are not pointing to any toggle auth function anymore. We've deleted all of that. So if you come to our counter slice, let's start with the counter. If you come to the counter slice, you realize that we exported all the actions. So you see this export here is exporting all of these actions here. What we need to do is we need to now import it in the component that needs it. So let me just grab all of this here. I'll copy that and I'll go to my components and I'll come here and I'll say import. So that import, and let's paste that in. So I want to import all of this from. So how am I going to do this? First off, let's go outside of this folder, outside of this file. Then I'll go into my store. Then I'll go into my slice. Then I'll now point to my, okay, so this first one is going to be counter slice. So that's for the counter. Then for the auth, let's look at the auth slice. What are we exporting? We exported this toggle auth action here. So let's come back to our counter and let's import it. So I'll say import that action from, same thing, we'll go outside and then we get into the store, and then from the store we go into the slice folder, and then we then point to the auth slice. Come on, help me. So auth slice, great. So I've imported all the actions that we need. All right, so if you look at them now, it's quite different. They're all capitalized. So what we just need to do is now update these actions here. So where we are dispatching this action, instead of toggle auth, we're going to change it to what we have here, which is toggle auth. So let's go ahead and do that very quickly. So I'll change this to caps toggle auth underscore auth. Then let's come down. Handle subtract, well, we're going to change this to simple subtract. Okay, then handle reset, we're going to change this to reset. Then the last one, handle add, oh, second to last actually, we're going to change this to add. And the very last one, we're going to change this to add number, because that's the name we gave it. So add underscore number. And as far as I'm concerned, we've updated the dispatch to the actions we imported from our slice. Okay, so now this is the moment of truth for us to go ahead and save this file and test our application and see if there's something we missed out or everything works fine. So I'll go ahead and hit the subtract button and it works. Hit the reset, it works. Add, it works. Add 5, it works. Now let's try the logout, login off, and it does work. So it says please log in. I'll log in and it works. So essentially we've been able to refactor a regular Redux setup to Redux Toolkit. And to now show you how everything is simple, I'll come here and I'll delete. So let's come to our store. I'll delete this action. So we don't need these actions in our Redux Toolkit. I'll delete it. One, that goes away. Then the reducers as well. I'll go ahead, right click and delete the reducers. And why am I deleting it? That's because we now have this slice, and the slice contains our actions and our reducers. So essentially, we just need only this setup when we're working with Redux Toolkit. I really hope that you appreciate how easier it is for us to work with Redux Toolkit as compared to working with regular Redux. It's important for you to know both. I will say that it's important for you to know both, because if you're working in an organization, they may have Redux setup, but they may also have Redux Toolkit setup. All right, thank you so much for watching this one. I'll see you in the next one. All right, that's it guys. Now if you enjoyed this video, then make sure to leave a like on the video, and if you're not subscribed, make sure to subscribe to the channel. You can also check out my website for front-end development courses, all things React and JavaScript. Thank you so much, and I'll see you in the next one.